Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat class. It is Shabbat, Parashat Tahor, as we call it in our tradition, which is Parashat Misorah, as better known. But it is also Shabbat Hagadol. And we ask today, what is so gadol about this Shabbat? In other words, obviously, the name itself implies that there's greatness to this Shabbat. There really are no unique laws to this Shabbat. There are some unique customs to it, but it's historic. And what we're going to try to explore today is just how historic this Shabbat is, just how gadol, great it is, just how much we are commemorating on this Shabbat, and how much significance it has. In doing so, we're going to unravel some possible issues and mysteries with the day. So let's start with the Gemara Masechet Shabbat. Tells us, of course, we know that the 19th of Nisan is when our forefathers slaughtered the Korban Pesach, and on the night, which is the night of the 15th of Nisan, they left the Exodus. The Gemara concludes by saying that that day was a Thursday, the 15th of Nisan, the year of the Exodus was a Thursday. Wow. So says, based on that, the Tur, that if you do the math, so that means that, well, what command was there prior to that? We know, and this was only an event for the year of Yetziat Mitzrayim, that on the 10th day of the month, we read this on the first reading of the first day of Pesach, in Parashat Bo, Mishechu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said that Am Yisrael should select Ish Sela Bet Avot, Sela Bai, that they should select a sheep or a goat for a household and start to ready themselves for Korban Pesach. When did that happen? The Torah says, Be'asur lachodesh, on the 10th day of Nisan. Oh, wow. Says the Tur, do the math. If you do the math, the 10th day of the month that year occurred on Shabbat. And based on that, we have several traditions of something that is stupendous. You could almost say, they call it a nes, maybe miraculous, or certainly remarkable, that happened to Am Yisrael on that day. And there are different versions of it. So I started by mentioning the Tur, and the Tur conveys what is the most well-known version of that story. And that is, they all started, the Jewish people, to select their sheep, and we know that they tied them to the bedposts, as we're told traditionally, and the non-Jewish neighbors, the Muslim, asked them, what is this? Vus is dus? Do they speak Yiddish? I don't know. And they said, we have a great event coming up. We are going to slaughter these for our God. You're going to slaughter these? I mean, this is our God. You're going to slaughter our God for your God. And they started gritting their teeth, and they started boiling up with anger. And normally what would happen next would be something tragic to Am Yisrael. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, gave them no permission. They shut their mouths. They didn't do anything. Says the Torah, because of this quote-unquote nest, that Am Yisrael was not harmed from their surrounding neighbors. We call it Shabbat Hagadol, and indeed, this is codified in Shulchan Aruch. It's not even a law, but it's the second siman chapter in the laws of Pesach. It says Shabbat Shlefnei Pesach, Kurin Oto Shabbat Hagadol, B'nei Shaneh Shena'asa Bo. It's called Shabbat Hagadol because of the miracle that occurred. The Bet David points out that even though the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch are books of law, and that means they point out laws that we have to follow, they still found the need to record this as, so to speak, a law, because there's a mitzvah to remember the great actions and on our behalf, the wondrous activities that Kadosh Baruch Hu performed for us. So that's like keeping a law, so to speak, and therefore they wrote it down as a law. But that is only the rendition of the Torah. The Tosafot quotes a midrash called Midrash Shohar Tov, and there's a little twist to the story. And he said, well, the same thing with the 10th of the month. They took the sheep, they put it aside, they put it on the doorpost, and to the eyes of the Egyptian neighbors. But first they asked Hashem, they said, Hen nizbah la Hashem Elokeinu v'lo yizkelunu. We're going to offer our korbanot, which is their gods, in their presence, and they won't stone us. Hashem said, you be quiet. Now you'll see this great nest that I'll do for you. I'm sorry, I wandered into the third rendition. Go back to the previous one. So they put aside their sheep. Everyone looked at it, and the bichorim of the in particular, including them, of the Misrim, also was asking, what's going on over here? And well, they said, look, God's going to kill your firstborns, right? And he's going to spare us when we perform the sacrifice, this korban. And they said, what? So the firstborns of the Egyptians, they've seen enough. They've been through a year worth of 9 other plagues, and they ran to their fathers and grandfathers. They went to the government. They went to Paro, and they said, do something now. Protest. They were rioting. Do something now, or else we're dead. They didn't listen. And then there was a civil war broke out. And then there was according to this rendition of the Midrash, people killed. Many people killed. And on this, we say in Tehillim, L'makeh Misraim b'bchorehem. And kill the Egyptian with their firstborns. With their firstborns. I mean, the firstborns were the cause of killing the Egyptians. That's the rendition of the Tosafot quoting the Midrash Shoharto. The third one, which I accidentally flowed into before, as I was saying, is brought by as a book that traditionally we attribute to Rashi, Sefer HaPardes, and the Kolbo, one of the Rishonim as well, and saying that they got the command and they told Hashem, what do you expect? That we're going to slaughter their God in front of us and they won't harm us? And Hashem said, don't worry, be quiet, I'll make you an S. And it says, according to this rendition, that the Misrim actually armed themselves when they saw this happening and readied themselves for the slaughter, to annihilate the Jewish people around them. Baruch Hu protected them and gave them different various diseases and other type of, he plagued them with certain things, and they weren't able to hurt Am Yisrael. And there another version and rendition of what happened, what wondrous act happened, where when we call that the Nes of that Shabbat, and because of that, label it Shabbat Hagadol. So according to all of these, and it could be that there's a mixture of all three versions, that happened, and they all have truth to them. But because of that, we commemorate, basically, it looks like, a wonderful favor that God, a historical event, and we have Hakarat HaTov, and for that reason we call it Shabbat HaGadol. We're going to get soon to other possible, completely different reasons. But before we do, let's ask a few questions. So look, we could assume then that was the start of the trouble on the 10th. Take one of these renditions. They came against them with weapons, and they plagued them. That means Am Yisrael were protected from that point in time all the way to the Exodus, the night, the 14th, and the next night. So why don't we call all 4 days in the middle? We celebrate them. The 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th of Nisan, and call them Yamim HaGedolim. And they're all great, right? Why just, so the Beit Yosef gives a simple answer. He says, because since it started on the 10th, right? So that's where the miracle began. And that was the main point of non-reaction by the Egyptians. And therefore we commemorate just the 10th. We call it Shabbat HaGadol. The Be'er Hetev quotes a Rabbi, Rabbi Moshe Elios, and he says, you know what the Nes, why was specifically more on the 10th and the 11th or 12th of the month? Because we told them that we're going to slaughter your gods. Now, when did they slaughter? They didn't slaughter till the 14th. So if they would have just backed off and not slaughtered, the Egyptian would say, okay, they're bluffing, right? But on Shabbat, they knew that the Jewish people don't slaughter on their Sabbath. And so therefore, when just because they stated their intention of slaughtering their gods on the 10th day, that was enough to anger the Egyptians. And the fact that they didn't slaughter it right away didn't mean they were bluffing. It's just because it was their Sabbath. And therefore, it's dafka on the 10th day that we were in danger of being victims to the ire of the Egyptians. Okay, but here's a bigger question, and we can say that all the Mefarshim asked this question, and that is, fine, the year of the Exodus was on the 10th of the month, right? It happened to be God commanded on the 10th of the month to choose the sheep and the goats, right? It happened to be that was on Shabbat, but the next year and every year it falls out on the calendar on a different weekday, right? So why are we celebrating Shabbat and calling it Shabbat Hagadol? Let's just celebrate the 10th of Nisan. That's when the miracle occurred. What's unique about Shabbat, right? Shabbat, all of a sudden, Shabbat's great anyway, right? We call it Shabbat, the great Shabbat. Call it the great 10th of the month of Nisan that happened to fall out on Shabbat that year. Why does Shabbat get all the credit? There are numerous fascinating answers to this. So answer number one, the Bach brings the name of Rabbi Moshe Harif. And he said, you know what? It's a coincidence, but it's not a coincidence. And that is that on the 10th of the month of Nisan, it also happens to be that 40 years, something years later, the Jewish people under Yeshua ben Nun's leadership crossed the Yarden, right? God split the Jordan River and they crossed the Yarden going into Eretz Yisrael. So it could be that if we attribute it to the 10th of the month, people would think that we're commemorating that and not the other 10th of the month miracle that happened in Yetziat Mitzrayim. So that's why we changed it to a 10th of the month celebration to a Shabbat celebration, which was the 10th of the month that year, so that people don't think we're celebrating something else that occurred on the 10th of the month, and thus Shabbat Hagadol. Another explanation from the Levush, in fact, the next two explanations will tell us why specifically Shabbat itself was the cause of the wondrous act that God did for us. It's because, says the Levush, that the Egyptians know that, again, traditionally the Jewish people, from their forefathers, they have certain restrictions, they keep the Sabbath. And they know that, animals, it's off hands for us. We don't handle animals. Now they see us handling these things, and they were shocked. And they're like, and that's why they started asking the question, why are you handling the animals? And because of that, take your rendition of the miracle, but that's when things unfolded. And the anger and the danger and the safety and the protection, because it was their Shabbat, their known Shabbat respect and observance, which then seemingly was being violated, triggered that whole event to occur. And similarly, the Pirisha says is that what were they doing with the animals? They were tying them to the bedposts. Of course, we know one of the 39 melachot prohibited activity on Shabbat is kosher. It's keshira, it's tying. And therefore they saw, Jewish, we know that you don't violate these activities. You don't engage in this on your Sabbath. What are you guys doing, tying? And they told them, and the rest is history. So there's two reasons why it's specifically attributed to Shabbat, because it's the sanctity of Shabbat and our observance of it that led to this event. The Dirisha, who's the same author as the Pirisha, offers a completely different reason. And he said, Moshe Rabbeinu, on this 10th day, when he had to command them of this mitzvah, of taking the Pesach, he said he gave him a derasha. That's what rabbis do, right? Moshe Rabbeinu gave them a nice speech. And in their speech, mishechu, in the Midrash says mishechu, pull away from, what really mishechu means, he told them, mishechu yedechem avodah zarah. So they were also engaged in the same time God observance and paganism. According to tradition, we know that they have avodah zarah activities, unfortunately, amongst our nation. And so Moshe Rabbeinu and his derasha was telling them, you're going to have to completely abstain from any of that idolatrous activity and only focus on this upcoming mitzvah of choosing this animal for your Korban Pesach and all the details that went with it. And the Dirisha says that derasha Moshe was obviously on Shabbat, the day of rest, the day of learning, and therefore it was because of Shabbat that was chosen for Moshe to teach them the law that we recognize this day as the day where Moshe Rabbeinu educated the people about this law, and therefore Shabbat we commemorate it, even though there was a miraculous event that occurred on the 10th of Nisan, but it was also because of Shabbat itself that there were great things that happened during the course of that year. So all these reasons, and they're all simultaneously true, and they coexist, are reasons to tell us why we call it Shabbat Hagadol, and not just celebrating the 10th of Nisan, whatever day, even a weekday that it falls upon. Fine. Now, all that is based on the assumption that what we're commemorating is one of we gave you 3 renditions, but whatever one you choose, the miraculous act of protection that Hashem offered us in that time of danger, the ness of the day. Are there other reasons, or are there other commemorations that and purposes that we have for recognizing this great day, the 10th of Nisan, Shabbat Hagadol? The answer is absolutely yes. There are many. So we have one so far, the ness that occurred. Here's another one. This is from the great Rishon, the Shibulei Halechet, and he said that this was a day chosen for the Hachamim throughout history to teach about the great events of Pesach, the laws, the mitzvot, the specifications of the great day of Pesach, Yom Tov, Chol HaMoed, etc. And tell about all the wonders of Hashem, to prepare them for the Haggadah, etc. And they chose the day of gathering, which is Shabbat. And their drashot, their classes, they weren't on the strict Bet Torah schedule. By the minute you go over it, Rabbi, I'm sorry, type of thing. No, extended. And, by the time they went home, it was really a long time because the rabbi had to pack it. If not now, when? We got the people, they gathered here, pack it all in now, right? And the day seemed very long to the people for that reason. And thus they called it Shabbat Hagadol. Wow, this day's drawing out, not in a negative way, right? But it seemed like, whoo, this day's never ending, right? Shabbat Hagadol. That's his reason. Now, Abu Darham says, in reason number 3, the name of the Mahzor Vitri, that this was, don't forget, a day that a mitzvah was commanded to the Jewish people, which only hadn't happened on Pesach Mitzrayim, and that is on the 10th Be'asol HaChodesh, right, to choose the animal for Korban Pesach. So it was the Shabbat that Am Yisrael were ushered into active mitzvah. Even though the first mitzvah was Kiddush HaChodesh, sanctifying the month of Nisan, but that was for the Beit Din. The people didn't do anything. This is the first time that Am Yisrael had an active mitzvah. And so they were inaugurated and brought into the habits of doing mitzvot. What a wonderful day to commemorate, and that's the commemoration of Shabbat Hagadol, according to that opinion. Reason number 4, we have a haftarah that we traditionally read, except for most kehilot only read it when Erev Pesach as Shabbat, and our community does not read it at all, but it's a haftarah from the book of Malachi, starts with Va'areva. It became known as the haftarah Va'areva, and it ends with a pasuk of Hineh Anochi Shulech Lechem Eliyahu Navi Lifnei Bo Yom Hashem Hagadol V'Hanorah. I'm hereby sending you Eliyahu Navi, Elijah the prophet. He's known as Mevaseret Sion. He's the one that's going to inform us that Mashiach is coming before the great, awesome day of future redemption will come. Informs us the prophet Malachi, talking about the future days of redemption and Mashiach. Now, you have the word Yom Hagadol in that, and it happens to be that this is the last pasuk of all of the Pesukim of the prophets, of the Nevi'im, because Malachi was the last prophet. And this is the last pasuk in the end of the book of Malachi. So the prophets ended off speaking to us about the Yom Gadol V'Norah. So because you read this Haftarah, V'Areva, on the Shabbat, or many Kehilot do, prior to Pesach, and it ends with this word Gadol, referring to Mashiach, which is the last pasuk of Nevi'im, we call it Shabbat HaGadol. According to that, that is the explanation of the Maharshal. Reason number 4. Reason number 5, the Taz mentions what his father-in-law, the Bach, said, which does happen to be that the 10th of Nisan, the Jewish people crossed the Yarden, the Jordan River, to go to Israel. Another miracle, right? That's another reason why we call it Shabbat Hagadol, although that's a little counter to what the Bach was explaining, that we choose Shabbat not to get it mixed up with that miracle, but it's just an add-on. It's another great thing of that day. Reason number 6, Mahari Mitrani, in the name of his father, the great Mabit, says that when Am Yisrael left Mitzrayim, we're in Mitzrayim, Paro had asked Moshe, some say Moshe asked Paro for a favor. You want a day, take a day off. We need fresh slaves. We need people that can really be productive and work for us. So Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the prophet, and he knows the tradition from his forefathers, he chose Shabbat. So that became a Sabbath, a rest day. But it happened to be that every other week, of every other year, Shabbat was over, and they went back into the difficult toils of work, of slavery, of servitude. But this great Shabbat was the first one that after the Shabbat before Yetziat Mitzrayim, they did not continue to work at all, and therefore it's called Shabbat Hagadol. And finally, reason number 7, it's a quote from both the Sefarim, Urim V'Gedolim. Hacham Avujah, Hazon Avujah quote this, and the Sefer also called Bnei Yisachar, quoted by other Sefarim, that this is very interesting. We know that the Torah says, Usfartem lachem imaharat haShabbat. And that's the command, the dictate of Sefirat HaOmer. When do you start counting the Sefirah after Korban Omer is brought, right? Korban Omer is brought on the 16th day of Nisan. So that's where the counting begins. But the Torah frames it as Mimahorat HaShabbat, the day after Shabbat. So the Sidukim, which was a heretical group that started towards the end of the second Beit HaMikdash, and later other similar groups, Karaim, etc., were born from that type of thinking, took all of Torah Shebichtav literally, and didn't count on the oral law Torah Sheba'al Peh. Our tradition tells us that Mimahorat HaShabbat doesn't mean Shabbat, the 7th day, the Sabbath day. It means the first day of Pesach. And Mahorat, the next day, which is the 2nd day, which is the 16th of Nisan, and that fits with the rest of the context, is where you start Sefirat HaOmer. They started on Sundays, Mimahorat HaShabbat. So what we wanted to do is to counter that, and not to have the people misled, and also maybe it'll take it out of their minds and cure them. We called the Shabbat before Yom Tov of Pesach Shabbat Hagadol to hint to the fact that, and then is going to come afterwards another Shabbat. What's another Shabbat? This is the first day of Pesach, but that's a Shabbat Katan. That's a smaller Shabbat. That's the one the Torah was talking about when it said Mimahorat HaShabbat. But our Shabbat, our real Shabbat, that's Shabbat Hagadol. Right? So when we label our actual Shabbat right before Pesach comes as a great Shabbat, right? So that really puts down the theory, that when the Torah said Mimahorat HaShabbat, it was talking about the actual Shabbat. Rather, it was talking about the first day of Pesach. So Shabbat Hagadol is opposed to Shabbat HaKatan, which is the first day of Pesach according to our tradition. That's reason number 7. So we have before us, ladies and gentlemen, 7 wonderful reasons, some commemorating historical events, and some explaining other means of significance, why we historically call this great day, and specifically not just the 10th of Nisan, but Shabbat, which whenever it is prior, whatever day of the calendar day it falls out to, prior to the holiday of Pesach, we call it Shabbat Hagadol, because of the wonders that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for us, the miracles that occurred on this day, and all the other significant events wrapped up to one, including learning Torah, preparing for the holiday. It's a remarkable, exciting, and powerful day before us for all the above reasons mentioned, and a great day in the history of the Jewish people. Enjoy your Shabbat, and as some say, Shabbat Hagadol Shalom. Amen.